I really don't feel like I should be here right now. I am not a minister. I am a director of religious education, a job that I stumbled into after being a preschool teacher who was picking up Sunday childcare work at the UU Church in Santa Rosa. I am not a member of this church that I've worked for 5 years, nor do I identify as a Unitarian Universalist or even as particularly religious or spiritual at all, an identity that is at odds with my current occupation. However, Reverend Marcus invited me to come here to speak to all of you today, to share a sermon. He and I have attended several retreats together on the future of youth and young adult ministry, and I think he may have interpreted my lack of patience and antagonistic questioning as some sort of wisdom. He's very kind in that way. But I did say yes to him, and I think that if I am being completely honest, I said yes out of my own self-interest. There's something that I find myself in conflict with in this faith that I have become entangled in. And what better way to sort it all out than here with all of you? There's actually probably a lot of better ways. Journaling, meditation, therapy. But today's not about doing things in a right way or even in a better way. It's about doing things the wrong way. But don't worry, this isn't just about me doing things the wrong way. I have plenty of other people to talk about who are messing up royally. So I'll begin with my students. Last November, I brought a group of teenagers to service here at UUCB. The trip was the first of several for our Neighboring Faiths program. Our teenagers learned about and visited a variety of different spiritual communities as a means to expand their understanding of what faith can look like and to help guide them in creating their own statements of religious identity at the end of the year. The Sunday we chose to visit was the one following the presidential election, and it was a deeply moving service for me. Reverend Marcus spoke on what we can do when we feel our faith being shaken, when we lose faith in the things we invested so much of ourselves into. One of the recurring themes was that of doing the next right thing. For me, Reverend Marcus's words resonated deeply and touched on something I really needed to hear in a moment of frustration and fear. And then I talked to the 8 teenagers who I had brought to the service. When asked what stood out to them from the service, I was met with a resounding response of they sang a song from Frozen 2. When pressed about what they might like to incorporate into our services up in Santa Rosa, they said more Disney songs. One teen, when pressed on what he thought about the service, said, and I quote, "Honestly, I don't remember. I wasn't really paying attention, but I did like the music." But 7 months later, when they reflected on their visit to UUCB in our sanctuary in front of dozens of members of our congregation, they said that they liked the song from Frozen 2. They didn't even remember which song it was. To any of you who have teenagers or who work with teenagers, I do not need to tell you how difficult it can be to get them to engage with earnest, vulnerable conversations. Often we do our best to expose them to profound lessons, literature, artwork, performances, in the hopes that something sticks or they absorb some deeper message through osmosis. But in my case, as the director of religious education, I feel obligated to make sure that my students engage with spiritual ideas and concepts in a way that's more than recognizing songs from a movie, because the way they were engaging with spirituality in that moment, it wasn't the right way, it was the wrong way. They weren't attending services at Santa Rosa, they weren't participating with the congregation as a whole, and opportunities for deep discussion always devolved into talking about video games and memes. The part that was exceptionally frustrating to me was that this wasn't some class. They weren't being graded, and I didn't even care if they could remember a single fact about religion. My goal for these kids was to find some connection to the spiritual, to find a sense of awe and wonder at the universe, to hold space for questions with unknowable answers, to feel like they were part of something bigger than the individual. Certainly, there was a way to get them to engage with spirituality. We just had to figure out what it was. So, over the next few months, following our visit to you all here in Berkeley, the teens learned about Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Buddhism. They attended services of these traditions, met with worship leaders, and reflected on the parts they resonated with. The persistence and exposure began to pay off, and the kids began to discuss these topics of spirituality more freely. They felt moved by music and rituals. They experienced connection with those they were attending worship with, and valued the wisdom that was shared by the worship leaders. However, as the end of the year approached, the teens' resonance with these experiences seemed to lose the impact we had hoped it would hold. As my co-teacher and I urged them to reflect on their spiritual and religious identities, we were continuously met with the response of, I don't know. They remarked on how they enjoyed some aspects of other faiths and were particular fans of the fourth UU principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning because they could believe whatever they wanted. In fact, the religion that had the most interest in them was Pastafarianism, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. As their DRE, I became more and more certain that I was doing something wrong. My job is to help these kids discover a deeper, fuller understanding of faith, but instead they were becoming indifferent to the very idea of religion, of even Unitarian Universalism. And the more the teens articulated their beliefs or lack thereof, the more I worried that my own beliefs were at fault for guiding these kids away from seeking a sense of spirituality. But why even care about encouraging these young people to participate in a spiritual journey in the first place? The profound answer is because, as Unitarian Universalists, believe that spirituality and being a part of a faith community makes one's life better and more fulfilled. The cynical response is that we want young UUs to grow into adult UUs, and the journey to them becoming future members involve these young people seeing the value in spiritual community and connection. Regardless of perspective, it is certainly in the best interest of UUs to bring young adults into the faith. One of the metaphors we use when discussing the transition from youth to adulthood in Unitarian Universalism is the cliff and the bridge. The cliff describes where children are left when they turn 18, suddenly unable to participate in the programs and activities for young people within the church. In the past, it was assumed that these burgeoning adults would simply enter into the adult part of UU life, attending services, joining committees, and participating in the congregation as full grown-ups. However, we discovered that we were losing young adults, and many young UUs would stop being engaged in their local congregations when they graduated high school. So the idea of the bridge was created to bring young UUs into UU adulthood with ministry, program, and support geared towards them. The image that the UUA website uses for the bridge shows a young person standing at the top of a cliff and an arrow representing the bridge pointing all the way down to the bottom where adult UU life resides. It's an interesting graphic. But graphics aside, this all makes sense, that young adults are leaving Unitarian Universalism, and it is up to us to hold on to them, to make sure they remain a part of the faith. However, I've never been a big fan of how this is framed. That image of the cliff and the bridge implies that one cannot be an adult and engage with this faith in the same way that they did when they were a child, that there is a prescribed way to be an adult Unitarian Universalist. A young person may not understand it, they may stray from the path, and so it is our duty to set them back on the right track, to push them towards the goal of becoming members who attend Sunday services, who participate in committees, and become what we envision grown-ups to be. And I see this image and think of my students who do not want to attend services, who are uncertain of wearing the UU label. I fear that the bridge is one that they will not cross, that the destination is one they will not call home. But shouldn't a faith as big and as welcoming and as loving as this one have a way to embrace those experiences too? To allow divergent journeys to still be a part of this spirituality, journeys that look vastly different than the ones we're used to? This sermon, although I didn't realize it until I was working on the final draft, is in part a response to the sermon that Reverend Marcus gave last fall, the Sunday after the election. The words that he spoke that gave me hope when I was craving it were to do the next right thing. Even today, I think of how helpful those words were and continue to be in the face of so much awfulness. It's at the same time, as I hold these words, I cannot help but think of this faith that has accepted me and invited me in, that has given me the opportunity to guide young people and foster their spiritual development. The faith that I do not identify with, but still love. There is conflict there, and it comes from one word: right. It is wonderful to do the right thing. It is a blessing to make things better and to improve and to do good in the world. But we will not always do the right thing. A journey will have pain and failure. It is not only the steps forward that we must accept. It is the stumbles, the trials, the knowledge that we will fail, that we will hurt those around us. As liberals, as progressives, as leftists, as UUs, we can often become fixated on being right, on doing the right thing, on guiding others down the right path. But the right thing is ephemeral and capricious. It rarely makes itself known, nor can we ever grasp its true nature. So when we fail to find the right thing, instead, we do nothing. Nothing. Nothing is better than the wrong thing, right? I would like to read to you now a passage from one of my students' statements on religious identity. One of the students who I was worried was approaching the Neighboring Faiths program wrong, who I was poorly preparing to follow the bridge from adulthood to childhood, or childhood to adulthood. This is from Wilhelmina Wilmarth. When asked about my religion, I always gave a different response. I'm an atheist. I don't have a religion. I'm a Unitarian Universalist. The inconsistency was almost painful. In middle school, some people seemed to suddenly have an awareness that they existed in this world, leading people to making their own identities. Gender, sexuality, religion, personality type, Hogwarts house, I'm a Ravenclaw. As I navigated through all of these and continue to, one still stood out, puzzling me. The definitely simple and not all complex frenemy of mine, religion. I always got uncomfortable thinking about it, and if I'm being honest, a little bit jealous. I watched my friends have bat mitzvahs, listened to their religious awakenings, encounters with God that they had experienced while they slept. I wanted that. I remember visiting the old degrading missions in Central California not too long ago. I recall stepping into the church, awestruck as I stared up at the high ceilings. I can still smell the cool scent of dust, stone, and age. A slight draft blew in from the warm outside, quickly turning into an almost frozen breeze inside the cold, dark room as it twined around my feet. I felt a sense I'd never really felt before, an eerie, mesmerizing chill. Looking up at that piercing stare from the Virgin Mary cascade, cradling young Jesus from a shelf, I felt unsettled. I briskly walked out to examine the tool used for grinding wheat. Yet that experience has stuck with me. I wish I knew why. When I first learned that I would have to present a statement of religious identity, surprisingly, I felt just a slight bit panicked. I had spent 13 years not knowing my religion, and now I had to figure it out in 8 months. Oh well, I thought, the school year's just begun. I've got ages. Well, here I am now at the end of my 7th grade year. It went a little faster than I had accounted for, it turns out. And I found that sometimes it can be easier to know what you aren't rather than what you are. So here's what I'm not. I'm not a Christian. I'm not a blind believer. And I'm not someone who believes that your life is already written out for you the day you are born. I've realized that instead of this day marking a stopping point in childhood and uncertainty to religion, it's a beginning much, much more than I can never know at this moment. But that's okay. I'm ready for it. To love the journey is to accept no end. The most important step a person can take is always the next one. The next step does not need to be right or wrong. It must simply be another step. For the act of choosing in and of itself is righteous. And sometimes it is taking steps down the wrong way that are the most important. I started this sermon off by saying I should not be here, that I am using this time with all of you as an excuse to work out my own issues with Unitarian Universalism. That is still true. But is my gripe with this faith really that it tries to guide us in the right direction? Surely that message of the sermon can't be so apparently contrarian. No, I don't think that this is what all this amounts to. Journey before destination. If we stop, the journey ends. It is tempting to want a journey to end. It is comforting, it is safe. It becomes easier to tell others to follow in your footsteps because you know where they'll end up. The reason I find friction with Unitarian Universalism, that my students do not experience spirituality in the same way their parents and elders do, is because their faith is so often treated as a destination. We try to bridge young people into being adult UUs. We curate a journey. We hold expectations for how they will find spirituality. When we do it wrong, we are guided back to the correct path, or perhaps abandon it altogether. Right now, there are hundreds of young Unitarian Universalists who are seeking spiritual community. They are young people of YUUP, children of lifelong members, teenagers about to face the cliff who will be met with a one-way bridge. These young adults, many of them, will not do the right things the right way. Many have no interest in Sunday service or experiencing their faith in ways that those who came before them have. They will do it wrong, and in doing so, will carve out their own beautiful, complicated, imperfect meaning in a world that defies understanding. So, what do we do? I do not know for certain, but I have some thoughts that might qualify as answers. Perhaps they're not the right answers for you, as they are wound up in my own complicated and individual experience with this faith, a congregation in Santa Rosa struggling with keeping its young people, and those who are desperately wanting to make a home for them. But here's what I can say. Do not wait for young people at the faith we hope their journey takes them. Do not give them directions from afar, guiding them towards a place that they do not feel ownership of. Instead, start that journey once more. Pack up your bags, bring the essentials, and leave some things behind. Join these young people on the road, knowing full well that they will take wrong turns, that they will fall, and that by joining them, we will share in those stumbles. But in those wrong turns, we will take new roads and we will trade some of our supplies for new ones. Embrace your journey and the journey of others, and perhaps instead of building bridges to the right destination, walk next to those who are most in need of companions. May you fall so you get up again. May you travel in good company, and may what you do next, be it right or wrong, not be your destination. May it be so.